The environmental impact of big cargo ships and cruise liners are more prevalent today than they ever were in history. The globalization revolution has caused a remarkable increase in the amount of cargo ships operating worldwide. It is estimated there are now over 100,000 ships roaming the Earth's delicate ocean.
The biggest source of pollution from cargo ships is its air pollution, which is as a result of its internal combustion engine, which it uses to move. Internal combustion works by meeting a flame with a flammable substance. When flame and the flammable substance meet, this causes an explosion, and the explosion will in turn push up and down a piston, which in turn will drive a propeller, causing the ship to move. So the reason these cargo ships are so bad for the environment is that they release greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and sulfur oxide. So these gases, when they're released, get trapped in the atmosphere, which as a result does not let a lot of heat escape from the Earth, which in turn causes global warming and damage to marine ecosystems.
One example of an affected animal is the Arctic polar bear. Global warming has drastically decreased the amount of ice in the northernmost part of the world, and this ice is the polar bear's habitat and hunting ground. Polar bears often drown while traveling miles to find the next patch of ice. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service listed polar bears as a threatened species in 2008, with its numbers expected to be reduced by 2/3 in the coming decades. Unfortunately, not much legislation is being passed to reduce emissions from enormous cargo and cruise line ships. While there are some United Nations laws against dumping a ship's sewage and physical waste into the ocean, the ship's air pollution is left untouched. I believe one of the reasons for this is the shipping industry is astonishingly profitable for corporations and governments alike. One of the few restrictions on boat emissions comes from the International Maritime Organization and the International Convention on the Prevention of Pollution from Ships. However, these laws are usually deemed as useless and inadequate.
So I'm going to demonstrate to you how truly wasteful these huge ships are. So your average car, right here, will get around 30-35 miles to the gallon. However, one of these enormous ships will get 0.00023 miles to the gallon. That's a gallon of fuel for every 12 feet the thing moves. So that means a ship will burn a gallon of fuel traveling the distance of this measuring tape.
To put this in perspective, let's say your friendly neighborhood grocery store is about 10 miles away. So if you wanted to travel this distance by car, it would burn about 0.3 gallons of fuel. However, if you wanted to travel there in a big cargo or cruise ship, you would burn about 4,400 gallons of fuel. Since these gas-guzzling ships require so much fuel to operate, they dramatically increase the demand for oil. This pushes oil companies to try and get as much oil out of the ground as possible, and potentially use dangerous methods of extraction, such as fracking and deep water drilling. This can be catastrophic for the marine environment, as evidenced by the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, which saw thousands of gallons of oil being dumped into the ocean every day. Big ships are also incredibly noisy. This can affect marine animals that rely on sound for navigation or communication by deafening and disorienting them. Ships also have an effect on man's quality of life. Some of the larger ports in the world have been associated with cancer from the air pollution. The Port of Los Angeles, the largest port in the United States, was responsible for 2,000 cases of cancer for every million people. The amount sought after is 25 per million. It is hard to comprehend the size of some of these ports, with the Port of Los Angeles being over 40 miles long. Unfortunately, there aren't many viable alternatives to fossil fuels in the shipping industry these days. The only other option is nuclear-powered vessels, which the United States Navy uses. These, however, are not cheap, considering some of the U.S. aircraft carriers can cost upwards of $12 billion. while a commercial cargo ship only costs around $10 million. The International Maritime Organization expects greenhouse gas emissions from ships to rise by 72% in the coming years, mainly due to the increase in demand for a greater number of bigger ships. Governments and corporations must realize the consequences of exploiting nature to this extent. Another environmental impact is the risk of a collision with the wildlife. The main victim here are large whales. While not very many are run over, it has a big effect on the population because there are so few whales left in the world. For example, about a third of the North Atlantic right whale deaths were due to collisions with big ships. While there's a lot of debate on land-based air pollution sources, such as cars and power plants, there is little debate over the oceanic forms of transport. This is disappointing because the shipping industry deserves much more scrutiny than they are currently receiving. This probably has to do with the fact that most people aren't as in touch with marine pollution sources as they are with terrestrial pollution sources. A lot of people drive cars and use electricity. However, most people don't own or drive huge cargo and cruise ships. The main debate regarding shipping is whether or not its upsides outweigh its downsides. While it has a significant toll on the marine environment, many people would argue that a disruption in the shipping industry could send the world economy spiraling out of control. No major country can function at a high level without significant importation and exportation of goods, the majority of which is done in the shipping industry. One container ship can carry 10,000 times the weight that one truck or airplane can carry. If left unaltered, the current rate of global warming would drive many endangered species to extinction and would change environmental conditions faster than the animals could adapt to the changes. For example, the lobsters off the coast of New England are exotherms. If the water around them warms, they will be forced to spend much more energy on respiration, which leaves less energy for migration and feeding. China's population is feeling the effects of the massive shipping industry more than any other country. Around 1.2 million people die every year in China due to air pollution, where shipping is one of the highest contributors. Ships are allowed to burn fuel with sulfur levels thousands of times higher than permitted in ground-based transport. And with 25% of the world's shipping going through China, one of these ships can be as harmful as 500,000 trucks driving the roads. China is afraid of losing trade to other ports and countries if they tighten air pollution regulations on the cargo ships. All countries must collaborate on this, however, because if the trade does shift somewhere else, it will only be shifting the air pollution with it, not eliminating it as was planned. However, the Chinese government has done virtually nothing to combat this shipping pollution, even though the International Maritime Organization has been pushing them to. Again, the shipping industry is too lucrative a deal to damage for China, considering 7 of the 10 largest ports in the world are located in China. It is disappointing to see the world's elite put maximum profits at a higher priority than the environment and their fellow man. This is of course nothing we are not accustomed to. However, in this circumstance, exploiting nature may have consequences nobody saw coming, and no one will be prepared to deal with. The powerful need to realize the gravity of the situation they are creating by neglecting to do anything about this pollution. The public needs to speak out and make their voice heard on this extremely pressing issue. If no one speaks out, then this non-sustainable trend will continue and will result in terrifying outcomes. Everybody has a voice and everybody can do something to help.